Thank you. Hi everyone, how are you? It's so fun to be here. I've known of you all for a very, very long time, and I'm so happy to finally be here and to get to share with you some of the things that I'm very passionate about, and some of the things that I think all of us, Aaron and I, were friends in before middle school, I believe, and I was friends with Darren ever since he was Darren. So it was a very long time, and we go way back. My wife and I are foster parents. We have 2 kids. Their names Matthew and Cecile, and I encourage you to say hi to them. They're very friendly. Well, sometimes. And they would love to see you. We are super happy to be here and to share a few things. Let me begin by saying this. What comes to mind, and what do you think of when I say being alone? If I were to ask you, what does it mean to you to be alone? What would come to mind? It depends probably on the life that you're living right now, the schedule of your everyday. Sometimes if I were to say, what does it mean to be alone? You would think, I just want to be alone. That's all I actually am striving for in life, is to be left alone. I'm very busy. I work a couple different jobs. We have family and all this kind of stuff. Sometimes if someone were to give me a free moment, I would say, I just want to go into a cold, dark room and look at nothing, sit there and just want to be alone, right? Because you have a lot going on, you feel inundated. And that's true. When we pull away, sometimes that's good, right? We're alone. Jesus did this all the time. His disciples, his closest followers, were sometimes very annoying and kind of maddening, and they really didn't quite get what he was doing very often, and the people were always kind of after him, so he retreated in solitude to be alone. He would go up the mountain to find a quiet time and a quiet space to think and be alone, and that's good. And I encourage you, even in that, if today, tonight, tomorrow, you need to find space to be alone, that's a good thing. It can be a good thing. But there's a different type of alone. There are different ways you can be alone. Sometimes you're forced to be alone. Generally, when you're growing up, if you get in trouble, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, my mom would say, Doug, stop being, whatever. They would say, you're in trouble, go to your room, be alone. And now I have to sit in my room alone. That only works if you have extroverted children. If you have introverted children, they love going to their room. Go to your room. Yes. Or I always think now, kids who have video games and things like that in their room, it doesn't work anymore at all. Go to your room. Great. I can just play Xbox for the next 2 hours. So when you get in trouble, sometimes the punishment is to be alone. That's still true if you are older and you break the law. They say, go sit in that cell alone, be by yourself. And if you're even bad in there, the worst type of punishment is to go into solitary confinement and be alone totally by yourself. So aloneness, being alone, can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. I think the worst type of alone, the worst type of aloneness is where you come to be alone. Let me explain what that means. When you find yourself being alone, again, let me explain what that means. Think of it like this. Imagine you're walking in the woods with a group of people, and you're on a trail, and you see a lovely little butterfly, and you're the type of person that likes to wander off, and you think, I want to follow that butterfly. You start to follow the butterfly, you jump over a little tree log, you walk down another path, and all of a sudden the group that you were with is now gone. And you realize, I actually have never been here before. I don't know where to go. I am now isolated myself. I'm now alone. I've found myself to be alone. There's a story that I always come back to. It kind of haunts my dreams. It's the story of 127 hours. Have you ever heard of that story? Yeah. But a guy I think he's rock climbing, or he's riding his bike somewhere, and he's kind of bouldering, and as he's doing that, he's in this little slot canyon, totally by himself. No one knows he's there. He falls, and as he falls, a rock falls with him and traps his arm. I think it's actually his right arm, underneath a rock. And as he's trapped there, the sinking in feeling of, no one knows where I am. I have no way to communicate with anyone. Days go by. I think it's actually 3 days, right, go by. He's so isolated and removed that he must do the only thing he knows how to do, and he must isolate part of his own body, right? He chops his own arm off. There's a part of that book and part of that story that always haunts my dreams. I don't want to even tell you what it is, but no, now I'll tell you what it is. It's when he's chopping his arm off, he gets to the tendons, and they're like spaghetti strings, and he can't get them. Yeah, I'll let you deal with that later. But that's what isolated means. To be isolated, it comes from the idea of an island, a peninsula becoming an island. Right? You have a big shoot of land, and out there is some stuff, and there's this connected part where you can drive back and forth, walk back and forth, do all sorts of things. You can live out there, but sooner or later, if depending on what's happening to the ocean, that part of land gets cut off and pushed away. It's now isolated. It's its own thing. It's an island out there. And now to even get to it is way more difficult. There's less transference of products, of everything. It's now out there. In a way, that's what that guy had to do to his arm, right? He had to isolate his arm from his body. And sometimes, for us, when we're going through life and we find ourselves alone, the possibility that we're isolated or isolating ourselves is high. And for us, as a society, as a group of people, and people in general, being isolated is the worst and most dangerous thing that could happen to us. If you think about the animal kingdom, who do the lions attack? The little weak one that has a limp, right? I think Stephen actually, more problems start to creep in because they're not able to reach out for help. I work currently in an agency that deals with foster kids and deals with foster families. Foster families are isolated families. They're isolated kids. For us, and have kids and grandkids is now gone. It's now gone. We had less than 2% chance of ever getting pregnant naturally. So I remember being at my in-laws' house, finding out that news, and just trying to cope with life. Trying to cope with the reality that everything I had done up to that point didn't matter. It was a waste. What was I to do now? I was completely by myself. I began to be isolated. I didn't want to reach out to people. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want anyone to know. I just wanted to go away and be left alone. Society, I felt, had left me out. God, I felt, had left me out. I was taken in this, everything was going so great, and then I got put out, and I wanted to be out. So I isolated myself. I'll come back to that story, because things actually turned out well. But there's another group of people that I want to talk about that are also isolated, that were isolated, that were put out and had to figure out what to do. It's the first Christians. The first Christians were kicked out, essentially, of society. In Acts, one of my favorite passages in the whole Bible is in Acts 4. In Acts 4:18, you can go there and we'll read it together. But in Acts 4:18, something happens to the early believers that I think is miraculous. At the beginning of their little fledgling movement, at the beginning of them getting together, rallying, being given their purpose by God Almighty, Jesus, the Son of God, ascending into heaven, telling them, wherever you go, I will be there. Go and make disciples of my name. Go, I give you all of the power. So these disciples, probably about as many people as this in this room, turn around and look at the great nation of Rome. They look at the great people of the Jewish people, and they say, we are going to make converts and disciples of these people. They start preaching the good word. They go out into the street corners, into the eateries. What are they called back then? I have no idea. They go into houses. They go all over, and start to preach the good word. Guess what happens? They are barked out of every place you can imagine. They are literally yelled out of the synagogue. They are yelled out of the temple. They aren't even allowed to meet in the temple. They have to meet outside in the little gate that that everyone can kind of go to, where they're selling stuff. They're like, look, we don't even want you near any of our religious stuff. They bring the leaders of this movement in. And in Acts 4:18 says this, and when they had summoned them, they commanded them not to speak or teach at all in the name of Jesus. The guys who they brought in are quite bold, and they just say, look, we do whatever we want, but we're not going to stop talking about what we've seen and heard. But the story still stands. They're kicked out. They're isolated. As a Christian movement, when they're kicked out, a lot of pressure is put on them. Because what now will become of this movement? What now will become of their group? Back in the first century, it was very tribal. In the first century, you lived with the people that were around you. And by the other people that were around you, you lived. It wasn't in this more like our modern context where you have a house, you have a job, and you're pretty self-sustaining as an individual or as a couple. And the friends that you have are for social benefit. That's not the way it was back then. The friends that you had, the work that you did, the community that you were a part of, literally took care of you. They watched your kids, they cooked your food, and everything worked as an ecosystem of care. So to say, as Jewish people, we're not a part of that anymore. We're actually following Yeshua, the Son of God, the one that you murdered and missed. We're going to follow this God. And they are kicked out. So now they have to be their own group. What do they do? What do they do? Well, what did Jesse and I do? What did we do in our own story of feeling isolated and kicked out of our own lives? There is only one solution to isolation, being cut off. And that is community. Community is the only solution, the only answer to isolation. And I know what you're thinking. Okay, great. Just go and be in community. Be around people more. It's not as simple as that. Because let me just tell you our story. I wanted to be around more people. I said, I don't want this to ruin my life. I want my life to go on. I want to have a great life. So I would surround myself with people. But here's the crazy thing about the way we work as human beings. Sometimes when you feel isolated because of an incident, because of an illness, something that happened in your family, something that happened at work, it could possibly be that you're struggling with infertility. Whatever it would be that is making you feel isolated from the people around you and feel cut off, here's what's crazy. You think, I know what I'll do. I'll just go to church. And then everything will feel so much better because I'll be around people. Well, I went to church. I was actually a pastor. I would go around family. I would go around community members, my friends. I felt alone in a room of crowded people. I felt isolated in the middle of a worship service. In the middle of people asking me how I was doing, I felt isolated. What on earth? So it's not enough just to be around people. Because you can be around lots of people and still feel isolated. I bet you, with a group this size, there are people who feel isolated even in this room, even in this moment. So what do? Jesse and I realized that it's not enough to just be around people. You have to communicate something when you're around people. And it's not even just telling people how you're doing. It's not like that. It's deeper than that. It's something that I'm going to challenge all of you to do at the end of this service. Not now. I mean, it could be now. But soon, this week, we realized that you had to tell people what was going on in your inner world. You had to communicate your needs to people. The first part about that, which is really hard, is you have to know what on earth is going on in your internal world. You have to know your reality. For me, I knew my reality. It was infertility. It was the loss of a life that I thought I was going to have. And I had to communicate that to people. I needed to communicate what I needed. I needed people to tell me that my purpose wasn't gone. I needed to tell someone to tell me and to help me see that just because I couldn't create a life biologically, I could create some good things in this world. And I bet you, if you're feeling isolated, there is something in your reality that you need to communicate that will bring you out of isolation. The people in our society, in our community, who are isolated, the single moms, the poor, the people who are jobless, the ones who are sick, the ones who are cut off from their family members, the ones who are mentally struggling, they have a reality that needs to be communicated. And it's not probably going to come out by just saying, hey man, how are you? It's deeper than that. It's a serious communication of an inner reality that we need to make space for as a community. Right? Okay. How then do we do it? We reached out to people and told them just that. I told people, this is what we're going through. Will you speak into my reality? Will you speak into what's going on in my inner life? And they did. And slowly but surely, we were having people see our needs. Guess what? The magic thing happened. Our needs were actually met. And when our needs were met, physiologically, physically, I felt better. I began to be brought into a community and see that my purpose was there. See that Christ did have something for me when my needs began to get met. The same thing happened in the Christian church. Stay in Acts chapter 4. Just jump over after this. After you see this community of people being cut off from their life force of the Jewish community. As they're kicked out, what do they have to do? In verse 32, and the congregation of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and not one of them claimed that anything belonged to him. Not that anything belonging to him was his own, but all things were common property to them. And with great power the apostles were giving testimony to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and abundant grace was upon them all. And then in verse 34, for there was not a needy person among them. For all who were owners of land or houses would sell them and bring the proceeds of the sales and lay them at the apostles' feet, and they would be distributed to each other. I often think we think this is a template for the way that we should live. Okay, great. Who has a house? Go and sell it. Give it to Matt, and then deal with the. We think, okay, perfect. This describes exactly the way we ought to live our life. I don't think that's true. I think it's descriptive of the way that they had to live because of the isolation they were experiencing. So the principle that we can pull out that they realize, that we need to realize, is that community works when you communicate your needs. Community works when you're willing to put the needs of others over your needs. I believe Jesus said that. Jesus also gave us a really good picture of how this works. It works like a body. How the hands need the heart, and the heart needs the legs, and the eyes need the feet. We all need each other, but we all need to communicate what is going on in our own lives so that we can get our needs met by the community. This is an amazing testimony about how God called a group of people to do something, and they realized the only way that they could do that thing they were called to do was to utilize the people around them. So here's my challenge to you, is do what Jesse and I are striving to do. We're not perfect at it. We're pretty good at it. But we're working at it. Jesse and I created a nonprofit organization to help people with infertility. We realized that people who are struggling with infertility are stuck in isolation. They don't even want to talk about it to their mom and dad, to their friends and family, to anyone. Their best friend, they keep it secret. So we've created creative ways to help them realize that they are not alone, and then for them to take the first step in identifying the reality that they're in, what they're going through, and learning how to create a community of care around them. So we're kind of leveraging everything that we can in our power to help those couples who are stuck in isolation. But this church has the power to do that with its members. This church has the power to do that for the people in Tustin. For you guys to realize and start to see the needs of the people in this church and of the people in Tustin and say, we want to meet those needs. But it starts with this being a place where your needs are being met. And I do think that means material. I really do, honestly. If there is someone here who's struggling to pay their rent, struggling to fix a broken car, and you have people in the church who could meet that need and do want to meet that need, but here's the kicker, that person's not telling anyone, and this person doesn't realize. To me, that's almost a misidentification of our mission. Those needs should be getting met here. But again, this person has to communicate it. This person has to be willing to meet it. I think that's true. I think probably a bigger call to action for us in our modern world is that there are people who have emotional needs, who have needs that need to be met when it comes to the things that they're going through, and they need to communicate them to people in this church. And this church needs to be the type of place that says, we will meet your needs. So this is my challenge. And then we'll close with something. But this is, my challenge to you guys is to identify, even now, what that need would be. It's kind of hard to do sometimes, but I know that each one of us, if we were to sit and think about it, have a need that could be met by this church. Here's the crazy thing about Christianity. I've been a Christian for a really long time. And I've also been trying to do stuff in life for a really long time. And I know that's true of everyone here. We all want to get stuff done and do cool things. That's really vague, but let me clarify. we all have jobs, right? And in our jobs, we want to accomplish a certain thing. With our houses, we want to accomplish a certain thing with where we're living. Maybe we want to buy a new house. Maybe we just want to buy a new apartment, get into a new apartment. Maybe we want to move. Maybe we want to have a different friend group. We want to play a certain sport. There are things in life that we want to do and feel accomplished in. Everyone is in that same state. Isn't that crazy? Everyone is trying to do something. I think as a unified mind of believers, we are trying to tell the people around us, our communities, about Jesus, about the life-changing love and grace of Jesus. We want to do that together too. But we're wanting to do a lot of things together. The tool that Jesus, the creator of the universe, God Almighty, gave people to get things done on planet Earth is other people. That's what he gave us. He didn't give us super hammers and axes to wield, and he didn't give us anything. Really, the only thing we have is each other and him. And he says, I'll be with you. But I am going to prepare a place for you. Use the people around you. And still, to this day, we're competitive. We're aggressive with one another. We isolate each other. We allow ourselves to not communicate our needs. God gave us community to get things done. I guarantee that if every single one of us identified one thing that we wanted to get done in our lives right now, whether it be a new job, a new car, better wardrobe, literally whatever it is, this community can meet that need. Literally. If one of you said, I have a family member who's struggling and needs Jesus, if you told everyone here what that need was, this community could meet it. Because God gave us other people to solve our problems. That sounds weird, but it's true. It's not superfluous or lighthearted and like, oh yeah, I want a cheeseburger. I'm going to call up Blake. Blake, order me a cheese. That's not what I'm talking about. Although it sounds kind of good. What I'm talking about are deep needs. Our needs that would cause us to isolate ourselves, the emotional ones, the things that we have passion about. God gave us community for those things. You guys are in a series. What we're talking about is our calling. All of us have a calling. We have a purpose and a calling to do what God called us to do. And the people he gave you to do that are sitting right around you. So my challenge to you, if I can even give you a challenge, being a guest here, is just to search yourself. Search yourself and find what you need. And communicate it to one person. That's what we do with the couples who we're working with who struggle with infertility. And we have 7 back check, but we say, you're going through something major that could cause you to be isolated, anxious, depressed. Tell one person about that. Tell one person about your reality and communicate that need. The challenge is the same to you. Figure out what your reality is. What are you going through? What are you passionate about? What is that need that's internal? Communicate it to one person. It would be awesome if it was someone here. That's the direction. That's the direction that the church is being called in to be. We're going to sing some worship songs. If you guys are in the band, you can come back up. And as I think about the early church, as I think about what that church was called to do and asked to do, it's really quite remarkable. Jesus leaves these people in Jerusalem in the first century and says, okay, tell the world. I mean, right? Tell the world about what happened here. Tell the world about what happened over the last 3 years. Tell the world what happened on Golgotha, which is the rock where Jesus was crucified. Tell them about the Garden of Gethsemane. Tell them about these stories. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have Instagram. They didn't have any way to communicate anything beyond talking to people. They couldn't even get anywhere very fast. They were like, all right, we're going to go to the next town. It'll take a year. They had no way to get the message out quickly. But here we are in California talking about it. Because the power of connecting two people is incredible. It's the way anything gets done in this world. And it's the way you can get your life and this church together, unified under a certain thing. Let me pray. God, thank you so much for my opportunity to be here, Lord. I pray that as a church, a Christian church, a unified church, Lord, that you would continue to remind us that we are part of an original call, an original vision to make disciples of the world, to make people realize what you've done for them, Lord. I pray that we fall in with that, and that we realize that by communicating what's going on in our own lives, Lord, you bring us together. God, I pray a blessing over this church, that you would continue to build this community. That, God, you would use me, that you would use Jesse, any of us, to help meet the needs of the people in this room. We love you so much. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.